I want to cover something that we've already covered on the channel, but I believe deserves a little bit more coverage because of what Russia has said in reaction and how unbelievably disgusting this reaction is considering the history. And I think it also shows that after Ukraine, Russia's probably not going to stop if they succeed. If this ends up with them on top and this works and they see that this was a successful strategy, there's no reason to believe that the Russians would necessarily stop at Ukraine. And I think this is one of the most obvious in front of your face examples of it. So recently we covered the protests in Georgia, and in the protests in Georgia, after a foreign agents law was introduced that would have put I don't want to get too much in detail of it. You can go to my second channel, you can watch the video I did. It's over 30 minutes long. I get really into the details, but the gist of it is that they introduced a law that if a organization, an NGO, takes more than 20% of the funds from overseas, they're labeled foreign agents. They have to be under monitoring, and if they don't, they'll possibly have large fines placed upon them. There was similar law introduced in Russia in 2012 that was expanded to a very authoritarian extent that led to NGOs that work against government corruption, media monitoring, and freedom of expression, civil rights organizations that were basically kicked out of the country and suppressed by the state. And so a lot of Georgians were very angry. They didn't want to see this go through. And so they went out on the streets and they protested, especially when the EU foreign minister basically said, hey, look, this is bad. Don't do it. It does not align with our values. And that really pissed off Georgians because the vast majority of Georgians, the lowest poll I saw was like 75%, want to join the European Union. They go out, they protest, and they win, with the government retracting the bill, finally voting it down, saying, nope, never mind, we're not going to have it, when they were trying to shove it through. The Dream Party was trying to shove it through, even after the president said that this is a bad bill and that she would veto it. They had the votes to overrule or veto, but the backlash was so immense from the international community and the domestic community that they couldn't do it. And Russia has reacted to that. So I want to talk about that reaction quickly. But first, I wanted to play a little bit of the rundown of them officially voting down the bill, just a little W moment, and then we'll talk about Russia's reaction, which is really, 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 really gross. Let's slow down. I have this on 1.5. Let's put it on 1.25.
Foreign agents bill. Opponents of the legislation warned it could stifle the Georgia's parliament has voted to drop a controversial foreign agents bill. Opponents of the legislation warned it could stifle dissent, curtail media freedoms, and hinder Georgia's aspirations of one day joining the European Union. The reversal follows days of demonstrations and mass rallies in the capital, Tbilisi.
This is the moment that thousands in Georgia had been waiting for. After days of protests, it took just minutes for the country's parliament to drop its controversial foreign agents bill, lawmakers voting it down by 35 to 1. A victory celebrated moments later by both opposition MPs inside Parliament. And those protesting outside, many who've spent days here fighting for what they see as the country's future, away from perceived Russian influence and inside the European Union.
Me and my generation were protesting here. We were standing like, I think 2 or 3 days in a row. So the fact that it is dropped and we're moving towards the European Union is, of course, a good and a happy fact for us.
I support my country always, and I'm standing here all the time because, you know, I'm Georgian, and it's my responsibility to stand here with my people. And about the law, I think that it's very bad for our country because we support Ukraine, we support Europe, and we want to be the part of Europe.
This bill has exposed a growing divide in the country over its links with Russia and Moscow's influence over the ruling Georgian Dream Party. Protesters and opposition parties had claimed the proposed legislation could stifle dissent and curtail media freedoms, mirroring a form of Russian-style repression ahead of a parliamentary election next year.
This election is looming. They already tried to pressure opposition, and opposition in Georgia is very fragmented, and I would say they managed to marginalize them. But at the same time, they see that there are some other societal forces like civil society and free media who could challenge them for the next election. So one of the aim of this law was somehow to subdue and marginalize civil society and free media.
Moscow has accused the West of orchestrating the protests in Georgia over the now-defunct bill, likening it to a coup attempt. And where Tbilisi's loyalties lie in the weeks and months.
I just had to shout this out. You see in the background, that's the Georgian Legion. They're a legion in Georgia. I think it's actually been expanded to a division, I forget the exact military order, but it's been expanded in Ukraine that's currently fighting. They have a really big social media account, and I actually met some people who have done some media work for them. They're pretty well known in Georgia. They have a lot of people in Georgia have gone to Ukraine to fight because they believe that the fight against Russian imperialism in Ukraine also extends to Georgia, because the Russians invaded Georgia in 2008 and have been occupying like about 20% of the territory in South Ossetia and Abkhazia.
Ahead could now be critical in its bid to join NATO and the European Union.
And to get a better picture of the
So that's the basic rundown of what happened. Now, they briefly mentioned this, so they don't really expand on it too much. They said that Russia voiced their opposition. And I like DW News, and it was like, voiced their opposition. I feel like maybe they should have been a little bit more specific about this. And so I went to the original tweet. And here is the original tweet from the Russian Foreign Ministry. Protests against foreign agents bill erupted in Tbilisi, that's the capital of Georgia, result in demands for the resignation of the government. The government is led by, basically led by an oligarch from the shadows. They're not technically the president, but they're an oligarch from the shadows that have a lot of influence with the Dream Party. A lot of people really don't like him because he's immensely corrupt and he's pretty oligarchical, and people don't like him. And so after the bill was they said they were going to withdraw it, some people went further in the process saying, hey, this government has already shown its cards, it's already shown its true intentions. We want the government to step down, which is not too crazy of a demand in protest. That happens quite a lot, that once they have success, they keep going to see what else they can get. And again, at the end of the day, it's the Georgian people. If they want to protest, that's their right. Protests against the Foreign Agents Bill erupted in Tbilisi, results in demand for the resignation of the government. We recommend to Georgian people to recall a similar situation in Ukraine in 2014 and what it finally led to. And therefore, it shows Euromaidan, a picture from 2014, and now a picture in Georgia from 2023 in the street protests in Tbilisi. Now, for those of you who, and then they put like hashtag think twice. For those of you who aren't able to decode exactly what they're saying here, it sounds like to me that what they're saying is in 2014, the Ukrainian peoples during the Euromaidan movement protested against the government after they withdrew from the association agreement they were going to make with the EU that would allow visa-free travel that Yanukovych promised he would do in 2012. Then, after the Russian state enacted economic coercion upon Ukraine by stopping 25% of the trade at the border, forcing the government's hand to be like, okay, you know what? We're going to go back on our promise. In the middle of the night, we're going to withdraw from this and instead join the Eurasian Economic Union with Russia. Protesters went on the street. They were beaten. That footage of them being beaten got broadcasted everywhere. Then the protest movement expanded to the Euromaidan, then the Automaidan, and they protested against the government. And eventually, Yanukovych, after failing in negotiations, ended up fleeing the country in a helicopter to Russia. And then the Russians invaded the country, annexed Crimea, and that long string of violence since then eventually led to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And what the Russian government, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs is saying here is that remember what happened there. Remember when they made the government resign, when they made the government that was friendly to us and Yanukovych resign, the government that caved to our demands resign, when they made him run out of the country, we invaded. Now there's a somewhat similar situation happening in Georgia with a protest movement that's pro-EU, that wants integration with the European Union, that wants integration with this Western bloc, that wants economic prosperity with the EU. And you're protesting against that. You're protesting against the government. Remember what happened in Ukraine. This sounds like a threat to invade, open on Twitter by the Russian government, saying that if you step out of line, you don't serve Russian interests, we will invade you. And some people might say, oh, but it's like a tacit threat. It's just a Twitter post. Remember, the Russians invaded Georgia in 2008. They have soldiers in internationally recognized Georgian territory in South Ossetia and Abkhazia right now, occupying 20% of the state. They displaced hundreds of thousands of people, killed thousands of people. So it's not like the Russians would never invade Georgia, right? We all thought the Russians would never invade Ukraine, but they invaded Chechnya, they invaded Georgia, they invaded Ukraine. Why would they not possibly do it again if what was going in Georgia was not in Russia's strategic or Russia's economic interests? It seems like, and this is the basis of modern Russian foreign policy, the Russians want to dominate the entirety of the post-Soviet sphere, which includes Georgia. So if Georgia doesn't do anything Russia likes, for example, join the EU or protest against authoritarian pieces of legislation, then they can crack down upon them and they will threaten invasion. Wow, I wonder why so many Georgians support Ukraine. It's really hard to comprehend. So for those of you who think that, maybe if we just give the Russians Ukraine, then they'll be satisfied and they'll stop and they'll never invade anything. You'll be rewarding the behavior, encouraging it, and they're pretty openly threatening invasion on Twitter right now. And there's no reason to believe that they wouldn't do it again, definitely since they're threatening it and they've already done it before. Just something to have in the back of your head when thinking about Russian-Georgian relations in the future of Russian foreign policy. Okay. Whew.